Welcome, attendees. We are going to start at 1:03. So thank you for coming in early. We invite you to put in the chat your name and which health council or health councils you're affiliated with. Thank you for being here. And while we're waiting to officially start, if we do have the captions right in mode for folks to read the full transcript, and then just ask that we if we can have the transcript saved for most of this our gathering today. Thank you. Hi, everyone. As folks are just joining in, we're just waiting for folks to pop in, and we'll start at 1:03. In the meantime, as you come into the room, feel free to put your name in the chat and which health council or health councils you are connected to or work with closely. Thank you. Want to shout out to the folks who are coming in as they are mentioning. Thank you for folks coming in from Los Alamos, Roosevelt County, Chaves County. Thank you for coming, Janet Johnson from Acting Department of Health, Acting Tribal Liaison, Enrique Bernie from Bernalillo. It's great to see you here. Grant County, that's just wonderful. Quay, nice to see some of our health promotion folks on here. Diana, Guadalupe County. Hey, Miss Diana, good. Seeing folks from more representation from Guadalupe. Cibola, good to see folks here. And of course, the Southeast region. Seeing all the nice folks coming in from various places. Right, let's get started. Thank you for spending this first full Monday in February to sit in virtual space with us. Ophelia Hudson, Health Promotion Manager, and Mallory Chino, Cibola Health Equity Coordinator, and myself, Health Promotion Specialist, welcome you to today's topic on identifying root causes and strategies for action. As you continue we'd like to support the New Mexico Alliance. We'd like to thank the New Mexico Alliance of Health Council for providing the much needed background with tech support. So if we can have Carrie and Geraldine and Kiana, please just do a wave or your thumbs up. Thank you. So folks know you're with us. Thank you so much. It is our wish these concepts and tools will aid you in organizing your work to bring you steps closer to aligning equity work and with your communities, partners, and stakeholders as we continue to find and learn new ways to anchor and sustain community partnerships. That these tools and conversations will enhance the valuable and passionate work you all do. We also want to acknowledge that this training comes in mind that many of us had, in a sense, prerequisites and concepts as this requires organizations and institutions to shift or to advance internal culture on health and racial equity. Because of the content and concepts, we graciously request you're bringing your whole self to this space. And so before we begin, let's go with a few housekeeping functions. This training is recorded and we will have breakout sessions. So if you have difficulty, please let Miss Carrie know. And we will have 1 5-minute break. Thank you. Next slide, please.
There's no slides, Christina. It just says Carrie has started sharing screen.
Carrie, are you able to advance the slides? Yes. Oh. You went too far. Thank you. We want to begin this day. We begin our foundation and framing with this principles of emergent strategy by Adrienne Mary Brown, whose work of 25 years in social environmental justice facilitation and a focus on healing. So that these principles we think about today as we gather is that small is good, small is all, that the large is a reflection of the small, change is constant. So we want to think that we're being like water, and what you pay attention to grows. There is always a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. There is always enough time for the right work. Never failure, always a lesson. Less prep, more presence. So in all of this, we think about what you pay attention to grows, move at the speed of trust, focus on critical connections more than the critical mass, build the resilience by building the relationships, and then trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. And so we think about the size of the target population is less important than the way in which resources are vested. And so that the order of today is the inspiration is the word, trust is the boat. This particular slide leads us into a humble philosophy and a way to acknowledge the fact that the real power of change, it speaks to practices, responses, visions, and plans that embrace complexity, interdependence, and transformation. This strategy has been observed from the natural world and is both ancient and constant. And the principles of emergent strategy include that fractal, that it's adaptable, it requires interdependence and decentralization. It is nonlinear and iterative change. It brings attention to transformative justice and resilience, and it allows for that creative more possibilities. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Ophelia.
Next slide. Hello, everybody. This is Ophelia. And I know you've seen this time and time again, but again, it's a reminder that this is a process for the State Health Improvement Plan. And a lot of us, I guess, well, first of all, I want to do a shout out to all the health councils that have been working so hard in aligning their priorities for their communities and aligning with the State Health Improvement Plan. So we're in the process of, in this process, we're, I guess, selecting the community priorities. And so as we move through this, some of the pieces in here are like the, for New Mexico Department of Health, they have been reviewing and pulling together data for the state health improvement assessments. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, but we will get the, identify the areas of improvement. We are also working with the tribal governments within our communities to also participate in this process and also add to the larger state health improvement plan. So this is the plan. Go to the next slide, which also continues the community health improvement process. So a lot of this, most of the health councils have gone through. We are, like I said, identifying priorities currently and also working with tribal government in this process. As we move through the prioritization processes for all the groups that are involved, the Health Council, the state of New Mexico, and we should have some of this prioritization together by, I'm thinking March, the end of March is what, you know, we're planning on. So right now, January to June 23, the health councils are in the process of doing their CHIP, which is the Community Health Improvement Plan process. I know you've seen this over and over again, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. And if you have any questions, please put it in chat and we can refer that to either the Health Alliance or to Roberto to ask specific questions around these processes. And then the next slide is we want to introduce our New Mexico Department of Health Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Patrick Allen. He's coming to us from Oregon with a background in economics. And he is really committed to health equity, transparency, and accountability. And he has a lot of background work in working with communities and running state agencies from the state that he used to work with. So we will continue working with him and continue developing a lot of the alignment with the state programs and really put everything in place for this state health improvement plan that we plan to put together. It's already in the process, so we want to just make sure, you know, that Mr. Allen was recognized, and also to let everyone know this is our new cabinet secretary.
Okay, next slide, please.
Hi, everybody. This is Mallory Chino. I apologize if I go in and out. I'm a bit under the weather. So right now we have a Slido poll. You can either go to the website listed and enter the code, or you can scan the QR code with your cell phone, and it's going to bring you to a poll with root cause tools listed, and you'll rank them 1 through 5 if you use them or if you're familiar with them. So you can go ahead and do that. We'll spend a couple minutes on that.
Actually, we're just going to close it in 1 minute and then we'll review it. Harry, do you think a lot of majority of folks answered the questions? We have 55 people here, so we're really excited to see the presence of community.
We are at 13 so far.
Okay.
Are you all accessing the poll okay, or do you need assistance with some of this?
Need assistance where to enter the code.
Yes, go to slido.com, or you can use your camera function on your phone and put it up to the QR code on the screen. So one of 2 ways. You can go to slido.com on your website and enter the code number 2183084.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for putting that into the chat.
And Christina and the DOH team, we have a comment saying from Brenda. She said she voted that she's not familiar with any of these tools.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll count them by like one person who we know. And if you don't, that's fine to put in the chat also. Hey, do you think it's okay to close the Slido and show the results?
Yeah, just a few comments in chat about those agreeing with not being familiar, and then maybe some around the phrasing of just understanding the question. So.
Okay. This is a ranking poll, so it's a tool. Some of these tools are tools that are sometimes either communities are familiar with and working with root causes or health determinants. And we just want to get a sense of how many people are familiar, or if they've used it or not. So don't worry, it's not really that important. We just want to get a sense of what folks understand. Okay, well, I think we can close the poll now and then kind of show the results, if that's we can pull that up really quick. Harry, are you able to let us know?
Yes, I will have that up in a bit. And I guess while Carrie's pulling it up, I could share a few comments in the chat.
Sure.
So from Anna, and she mentioned we didn't use all the tools. And someone mentioned being unfamiliar with the terms, which is also good to know because these tools are probably new to many health councils. And someone mentioned that they love the use of the poll around this certain question. So yeah, and I kind of think that sums up some of it right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have the poll listing up here with majority of folks knowing that the 5 whys is the most tool that they've used mostly, followed by health and all policies, results-based accountability, RBA, pathways diagrams, and racism as a root cause. But we also know that some folks are not familiar. So we can go back to the slide. Thank you. Thank you for participating in that.
Want to
Skip.
move to the next slide?
Yeah, give maybe Carrie a moment to pull him back up and then advance it. And if you're just now joining us, please feel free to list which health council or health councils you're connected to. Okay. Oh, the last slide. There you go. You ready, Mallory?
Yes. Okay, so the poll we took, these are 5 tools that can be used to assess root causes. The 5 whys we did initially go through in one of the very first trainings. There is health in all policies. Results-based accountability is requires like a longer time period, which we don't have right now. But today we're going to cover the pathways diagram and racism as a root cause approach. We'll go ahead and pass that on to Ophelia.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we all know, and some of you might be new to this, but the social determinants that we're going to talk about in some of our conversations today, the social determinants of health for people are where people are born, grow, live, work, and play, and age. So these circumstances are shaped by the distribution of money, power, resources at all levels, locally, nationally, and globally. So when we're talking about addressing change within population, one of the things we really look at is to change from looking at looking at problems in the community downstream. Instead of looking at it downstream, we want to move to the upstream to address population change. And a lot of those population changes could be laws, policies, regulations that will create positive conditions for supporting community people. And a lot of that will improve community conditions. And that's kind of where we want to go with this, is to change the mindset of not addressing symptoms, but to really address systems change and have collective impact on the community. Next slide, Carrie. So this is kind of your an example of pathways from the social determinants of health. So you have like the equal distribution of social determinants by groups, and they list all of the socioeconomic statuses of people in the community. And those changes can happen at the different levels to have positive outcomes. So at, like, say, racism or other forms of discrimination, it could be open for job opportunities, food security, your physical environment. You would address like housing, safety, maybe access to healthcare. And the sociological factors are like setting up social networks for people to engage in, civic engagement. Psychologically could be to improve self-esteem, also to give people some hope. And so those are some of the social determinants, the conditions and the factors. And then we have the immediate outcomes would be to to promote healthy behaviors in this pathway. And again, like I said, to have positive outcomes, health outcomes, either individually or at the community level. So that we wanted to kind of show the pathways for the social determinants of health. I don't know if you want to add anything, Christine. Okay, we can go ahead. I'm sorry, Christina, go on to the next slide. So here we decided to share this because this is a little bit more in-depth in terms of what we just discussed about the social determinants of health. And the question is that, is being Indigenous a social determinant of health? And the answer to that is yes. Reason for that is because the Indigenous in the Indigenous context, you include unique structural determinants, such as those that are listed in the orange box. Native communities and Indigenous people have to deal with colonialism, colonization, racism, marginalization, dislocation, social exclusion, self-reliance, and self-determination. So along with all of what I had covered in the social determinants of health, the Indigenous population has to deal with more than just what I had discussed earlier. So when you're working with Indigenous populations, those are some of the things to keep in mind, and focus on the underlying structural determinants using a strength-based specific, I guess, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Using a strength-based perspective that celebrates the positive determinants connected to maybe land, because a lot of Indigenous tribes are really connected to land, or relationships and communities. So when you look and work with communities of Indigenous populations, it seems like you have to go a little bit deeper and really be cognizant of the Indigenous determinants also in this process. Christina, you want to add anything else?
I would just say that as you examine this a little more closer, you start beginning to see the interfaces because of the specific determinants that are not always seen, and have a historical narrative associated that bring or uplift or show the relevancy to determinants of health. Because culture and language, settler colonialism, which is a different context of colonialism, have a historical conversation that ensures that we're not just talking about a westernized concepts, that we're bringing in another layer of this. And so when you're working with tribes or your own community, Indigenous tribes, then if you're wanting to think about how are we interfacing the concepts of self-reliance, of preservation, all of those isms, so to speak, that impact families and communities. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so oops. So we're gonna watch a video. It's about 4 minutes long, and it's an allegory by Dr. Tamara Jones. And she's an American physician, epidemiologist, and an anti-racism activist who specializes in the effects of racism and social inequalities on health. She also identified that racism is a public health crisis. We can go ahead and continue with the video. Then after the video, we're going to have a 5-minute break. We'll reflect on the video during that time, and then we'll come back and do takeaways from the video. Whenever Carrie can get us started.
Let's imagine a
Technical difficulties for a couple of minutes. Sorry.
Let's imagine a gardener who has 2 flower boxes.
We can't see the video.
Notes to be filled with poor rocky soil, and another Let's imagine a gardener who has 2 flower boxes, one that she knows to be filled with poor rocky soil, and another that she knows to be filled with rich fertile soil. This gardener has 2 packets of seeds for the same type of flower. However, the plants grown from one packet of seeds will bear red blossoms, while the plants grown from the other packet of seeds will bear pink blossoms. The gardener prefers red over pink, so she plants the pink seed in the poor rocky soil and the red seed in the rich fertile soil. And sure enough, the different soils yield different results. In the box with the poor rocky soil, things look bleak. The weak among the pink seeds don't even make it, and the strongest among them grow only to a middling height. On the other hand, the red flowers grow up and flourish, with the fittest growing tall and strong, and even the weakest making it to a middling height. In time, the flowers in these 2 boxes go to seed, dropping their progeny into the same soil in which they were growing. The next year, the same thing happens, with the pink flowers in the poor soil struggling to survive, while the red flowers in the rich soil growing full and vigorous and strong. And these flowers go to seed. Year after year, the same thing happens. 10 years later, the gardener comes to survey her garden. Gazing at the 2 boxes, she says, "I was right to prefer red over pink. Look how vibrant and beautiful the red flowers look, and see how pitiful and scrawny the pink ones are." This story illustrates some important aspects of the different types of racism. There is the initial historical insult of separating the seed into 2 different types of soil. The contemporary structural factors of the flower boxes, which keep the soils separate, and the acts of omission in not addressing the differences between the soils over the years. The discrimination is further perpetuated when the gardener, disdaining the pink flowers because they look so poor and scraggly, plucks the pink blossoms off before they can even go to seed. Or when a bee comes along to pollinate the pink flowers say, "Stop, don't bring me any of that pink pollen. I prefer the red." The pink flowers internalize the belief that red is better than pink. What are we to do if we want to put things right in this garden? Well, we could start by addressing the internalized racism and telling the pink flowers, "Pink is beautiful." That might make them feel a bit better, but it will do little to change the conditions in which they live. Or we could conduct workshops with the gardener to convince her to stop plucking the pink flowers before they have had a chance to go to seed. Maybe she'll stop, or maybe she won't. Yet, even if she is convinced to stop plucking the pink flowers, we have still done nothing to address the poor, rocky condition of the soil in which they live. What we really have to do to set things right in this garden is to break down the boxes and mix up the soil. Or we can leave the 2 boxes separate, but fertilize the poor soil until it is as rich as the fertile soil. When we do that, the pink flowers will grow at least as strong and vibrant as the red, and perhaps stronger, for they have been selected for survival. And when they do, the pink flowers will no longer think that red pollen is better than pink, because they will look over at the red flowers and see that they are equally strong and beautiful. And although the original gardener may have to go to her grave preferring red over pink, the gardener's children, who grow up seeing that pink and red are equally beautiful, will be unlikely to develop the same preferences.
Okay, so We're gonna do 4 breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And discuss the video when we come back. Thank you.
Terry, I'll need to get into a breakout room that doesn't have. I've been assigned to breakout room 1, but Geraldine is already in there.
Did you find your room?
You're muted, Christina.
So I'm not sure which breakout room I'm going in. Everyone has a breakout room. Is this the room that no one has a facilitator in there?
This is the main room.
The main room?
Yeah.
So no one was assigned to others? The other folks, John, Fireflies?
They are. It's possible that they're not clicking it. Sometimes that happens maybe if they're like away
Okay.
from their screen. They've been assigned one. It's just they have to be prompted to click it.
Okay, so group breakout room 1 and 3, and I think 4 are taken.
Yes, there's a facilitator in each room.
Well, there's 4, so you're missing me.
Sorry,
Geraldine and Kiana were supposed to join 1.
I moved them to a breakout room, but they moved back to breakout room 1. So Kiana's in 4, Ophelia's in 3, Mallory's in 2, and Geraldine is in 1. I moved them, but they moved themselves back.
Okay, let me see. Can I choose? Can you allow me to choose?
Which room do you want to go to?
It don't matter. The one that doesn't have, I'll go with the one with Mallory and with Mallory.
Okay. Okay.
In room 2.
I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording for a second.
And is there a way to hide my cursor?
No, there's not, but if usually like the bottom left-hand corner of your screen will work the best. Yeah, like right there. I can't see it if you put it.
Can you see the sidebar that pops up?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so mine
Yeah,
needs to-
right there's the perfect spot.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're waiting for folks to come back into the main room. We're slowly getting there. All right. Okay, Mallory, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, so just real quick, a couple takeaways from the video, and we'll start with group 1. Somebody chime in.
Okay, that was, I believe, our group. So we had, I'll point out a few key thoughts. I think the biggest thing was that a comment with maybe we could as a network of health councils to look at more videos around the different snapshots of each layer of racism, and to really look at each iteration in the process of when you're planting the seed. And so one of the comments was, you know, with some of this information that we're only beginning to scratch the surface. So it would be really nice to have tools and to have more in-depth conversations with, you know, each of the different layers and different levels of racism, you know, that exists in society. But in particular, specific to the video, a few comments that we have were just thinking about the reproduction of babies, and you know, with this analogy that a lot of babies are born with some of the stress impacts. So as a result of that, there's been a lot of resiliency. But someone noted that, you know, some of those who are most, you know, impacted by racism, they get so tired of having to be resilient and strong all the time, you know, to a lot of these challenges. And the other were around, you know, would you notice some of these differences? And so, like, for example, we all come from different backgrounds, lived experiences, and for example, Marilyn mentioned, like, would she notice all of the differences or some of the analogies or the hidden meanings in the video, versus probably me if I saw something different from her, because I have my different lived experiences, and you know, maybe I'm just impacted differently. So that was one of the key messages, was, you know, how much of this we saw and how evident it was through the analogy. The last thing was just around the language. The video kind of set the tone with using words like Rocky, you know, some of those terms, and it kind of set the scene for us in a way that we couldn't create our own perspective. And in a way that the video, you know, kind of did a lot of the context setting for us, but we weren't able to go in, you know, with a clear mindset and kind of develop our own perspective around this. So group 1, I think I gathered everything. Oh, the last one was someone mentioned that this analogy also touched on generational wealth. So not allowing, you know, thinking about building generational wealth, and in the analogy, the seeds weren't able to fall. So that also had influence and impact on, you know, the other seed that was growing, that was you know, much more stronger. So that was kind of group 1's discussion.
Thank you, Geraldine. Group 2.
I think that was your group, Mallory.
Yeah. Okay. Are we doing that, or are we getting somebody? I can report out. So we're talking about like internalized racism, growing up, seeing like images on media and stuff like that, and really questioning, like, is that how we're seen as a particular race that was portrayed? We also talked about like the structures that affect an individual, and we don't realize like how other things, our environment really affects us, and how sometimes we're dealt an unfair hand. Those are a couple things that did stand out. We're a little short on time, so I'm gonna go to group 3.
I think that was our group. This is Ophelia. We had some conversation about being aware of what's going on in your communities or in your areas, and constantly being aware of those so that you can kind of look to see where there's the change needs to be made. And someone mentioned there will always be barriers, and what we need to do is teach or even help people get around these barriers and figure out how to do this better. We also talked about having open conversations in communities to address these issues. And again, I think a lot of these, the context, we'll discuss those a little bit more as we move through the training session. So I know we didn't have enough time in this breakout session, but we will. Is there anything else you want to mention in anybody else from group 3? If not, then those were probably 3 points that I heard.
Thank you, Ophelia. Group 4.
I think that was my group. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. I was shifted around a couple groups actually before I was finally settled. So in our group, we spent our time talking about, in relation to the video, I guess, the challenges between communicating with the public and representatives of the differences between equality and equity. And, we discussed how like a cookie cutter approach, which, is essentially an equality approach, is, not appropriate for some special populations that may need different types of support. But we also discussed as well that to the public and to representatives that equity programs and efforts might seem like inequality in itself, since there is a distribution only to these special populations. And so we were sort of questioning, what can we do in communications to communicate what equity really means, and that was as far as we got. It's a really big and ongoing challenge that I think we all need to ask ourselves continuously as we do this work. And if anyone else that wants to add anything, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna, Christine.
Right, thank you. We're
Christine
gonna,
has her hand up.
as this conversation from the breakout rooms is now leaning into the root causes for growing communities. You may have seen variations of root cause as the tree for root cause, for how and where they exist on this continuum of this social, what we call, and what social determinants of health experts talk about, social stratification. As we bring that awareness into ourselves and into the work that we do, how are we working with community to address the underlying systems of dominant culture and narratives that reproduce those health outcomes? And the root cause framework is a process to assess how a project or a plan internally within a culture, organization, or how it looks in structures or in systems that impacts the roots of the tree. And through those determinants, the disease outcomes listed on the branches. So the directions we take up here is that the importance of context-specific strategies and tackling structural as well as the intermediary determinants, which are in the middle somewhere, because social determinants has many layers within that. you have the built environment, the social environment. And then we start thinking about, well, how do we bring in to address those forces that are producing these outcomes? And that a lot of times requires that social participation in employment as critical components of a successful policy agenda or an intervention on social determinants of health and health equity. So with that, we think about what health issues are concerns in your community, what behaviors contribute to those diseases, what influences those behaviors, and what social or economic or political factors are at play. Okay, next slide, please.
Hi, Christine. We do have
Okay.
a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Christine Hollis.
No, I'm sorry, because I actually didn't say that much in the group, but I was just also thinking, and it does go to the slide, I guess, that you are doing right now, but it does strike me, and probably for this slide with the racism and the classism and other things, is one of the things about the gardener's tale that I wondered about is that we didn't talk very much about the gardener herself. And it seems to me that this tale could also be used for a discussion of sort of white supremacy in that case. Now, nobody pointed out, whether the gardener was, Black or Native American or whatever. But it is interesting that it is the gardener that chooses the two different pots of soil and what goes into them. And it's the gardener who chooses, which seeds go into which pot. And it's the gardener who chooses, to put the same seeds back into the same pots and a lot of other things. So I do honestly feel that that could be used for that kind of discussion also. And that would also relate to the root causes of health underneath here.
Appreciate your comments, Christine. Those are examples of how you can bridge the connection, the connective tissue within the health councils and the communities to expressing creativity and how you analyze root causes, the challenges that may be coming with it. So this is a process and it is a journey. Racism in and of itself is a journey. It's actually a lifelong journey. And because for the purposes of this presentation today, we would need a whole separate kind of work in which really embodies everybody's participation to continue to bring that awareness. So thank you for that.
Just a quick comment, Christina, this is Ophelia. I think we kind of discussed that in our group, and I think one of the comments was that we could be the gardener also, and how we work with community and how we address these issues in communities. We can consider ourselves the gardener too. So there's many perspectives as you move through this process.
I want to uplift the comment in that's mentioned, a comment on the underlying systems, part of the root causes about history. So because I know that you may have that history of colonization included here as a question, it seems like that might be a major contributor. What do you think? That's a question for all of us to think about. And if we will want to engage in more of that in our presentation, to get you to continue to think that history, not in a historical stance, but a historical exploration in your community of how those policies were shaped, both internally in your organization and externally. So I appreciate those comments in the chat. Next slide.
Okay. On this, we do have a couple of slides. Maybe I think we have a total of 3 slides that we will present on pathways, the pathway diagram. And this is just to kind of give an example of ways that you can address some of these policies. And this one specifically is on zero tolerance in school and how it impacts the community and health outcomes. And these are just examples. We will be working through another breakout session to do some of this work. but some of the upstreams issues are listed here. The immediate, intermediate outcomes, and then the health outcomes. Christina, you want to add anything on this before we move to the next slide?
Yes, the pathways diagram is an example of utilizing your why questions here. So
Right.
you initiate from your zero tolerance policy in schools, or you can work backwards, meaning you can start with health outcomes. That's your theory of change model that has been mentioned at some point or another, where you can start with the health outcomes and work backwards as to why is that happening? Or you can start with the policy and moving forward. Why is there a zero tolerance policy in the schools? Or why does it lead it to what? And then you start beginning to explore with your community, and that this process pathways, it is an example of a journey that you work with your community. We're going to do a Jamboard activities for folks to be randomly assigned, but we want to show you the example here of what it can look like, how when you start dialoguing and conversating with your community, what are the upstream issues that lead to these intermediate outcomes, but eventually lead to health outcomes in however way they look. So I wanted to just share that. And these next two slides show the various pathways, exchanges, or interconnections at play.
Now this slide is kind of, we didn't want to say negative, kind of the consequences, but it really looks at the tolerance, the zero tolerance in schools, and where the student is just sent into the juvenile justice system, and what that does with students and their health outcomes. So there's, you know, the upstream issues of violence, gang activity, just pretty much the upstream issues. And then their intermediate outcomes are also listed here, which could be high in anxiety, alienation, anxiety, which leads, you know, to a lot of what we're seeing in our communities is the injuries and suicides. We have infectious disease up, we have obesity, chronic diseases. So if they have, like down below, if they do have social, these different, we don't have very many social support, then some of these health outcomes are very impactful within our communities. And a lot of communities are seeing that, and you're seeing this now on your priority listings. When you're doing your assessments, when you're doing your data, looking at your data, you'll see a lot of these health outcomes that are listed. And let's go to the next slide. Now this one is kind of providing some support to, and this one is not the school tolerance one, but there is a policy that addresses and promotes positive behavioral health interventions and restorative justice, meaning that we are addressing or repairing the harm in communities. So a lot of this is, again, teaching students conflict resolution skills, educating teachers in the classrooms, providing them counseling and behavioral support. And then, you know, some of the outcomes could be that the behaviors in schools are changing. Your school has a safer environment. And you notice that the education piece in the middle is highlighted because you're kind of want to impact that within communities. And as you provide education for students and they're stable in the way that they're approaching a lot of these behaviors, and their behaviors are down, perhaps there's your criminal activity is lower, your ability to get jobs for students as they graduate, and your school is healthy and safe. There might be money for supporting and other resources. Death and injuries are down, and you have positive mental health outcomes. So when you're addressing these setting up these pathways, these are some of the things you might think about in terms of how you follow the paths on these pathway diagrams. So we wanted to give you like some examples. Christina, do you want to add anything?
When you're looking at these from a policy standpoint, or even or from an intervention, to think about where those intervention opportunities, not all pathways are going to look so linear. Some communities may want to take it from a circular type of lens. They might maybe want to revisit this particular issue. And the idea is not you're going to be addressing every single pathway. The idea is that what is the most probably because you're going to be building this into your narrative and setting up that for your narrative. These pathways are useful to work with your community to address what is probably the most immediate or critical or long-term need. So it's always something that you can utilize and know that it's not done like we're going to do today. You're going to be going in a breakout session and you're going to be doing this in 15 minutes. It's going to take a lot longer process, but it helps you to address it. Christine, you have your hand up.
Just a real quick question, and if you already said this, I apologize for not hearing it. But just a quick question. I don't disagree with these logic models at all, but I'm just curious. Are they based on assumptions or are they based on research?
They are
In other words,
based on a policy that's already identified, that's been identified, and you work with your community and based on the questions that you're asking on why is this happening? What are the possible links? They could, but if the community knows, then it most likely is not an assumption. You use the information, your pathways in sync with your assessment tools, your other assessment tools. And it helps to bridge the conversations that you're having, as well as in that you are finding the data that supports it.
okay, and the only reason I ask is because I know very well going into root cause analysis that we are going to have to try and get people to respond when they're thinking of the root causes of things they know or something else rather than opinions and stuff like this. So I was just curious, if one were to show this as an example, is it like we know that, for example, teaching students in conflict resolution skills, is there enough research out there that shows that misbehavior in school goes down? I'm just curious about the basis for it, but I do understand your point. That's great.
Evangeline, you have your hand up.
Yes, kind of along the same lines. So it seems like this slide here takes into account a little more an individual's developmental stages and is supported by that instead of just a zero tolerance based policy. So that's what it looks like to me. Like there are things that you expect, obviously not violent outcomes or behaviors, but taking into account that, children will have or, have certain reactions to certain situations. It's a little more sensitive to that in this slide anyway.
Thank you, Angeline. This particular slide has to do with interventions that support a particular policy or response. And then it's also important to recognize that maybe we're not thinking about reparations. We're not thinking about restorative justice. How do we, and if has that been conversated in the conversation with community as you guys are, as you work together to assess what's happening, and this pathway helps to bring another analysis to the lens.
Yes.
So I think we should, because for time, I think we should move into the breakout groups. What you're going to do with in the next slide. So let's go to the next slide, where everyone's going to be grouped into 2 groups assigned. One group's going to address policy, and another is going to do interventions. Try not to get into the weeds of like getting harped up on one policy. Just try to select one and then just start talking it out. You may not get through it all, but the idea is that you're being initiated into this process and getting getting the practice, so to speak. And then we're going to come back with reflections. We may reduce that to 5 minutes just because of time. When you're ready, Carrie, we can go into to the rooms, and then they'll also need the Jamboard activity in the link. They'll need the link for room 2 for those who are joining room 1 and 2. I'm not sure how you're doing it for the 4 rooms, for the 2 rooms. I'm sorry. Carrie, are you having issues with the sending folks into the rooms with the link?
I believe Rebecca was supposed to post the link for me.
Yeah, it looks like there are 4 rooms.
No, there are 2 rooms randomly assigned. One is a policy and the other is interventions. There's 4 slides. The first set of slides is for policy and the second set is for interventions.
Yeah, so it looks like we did accidentally open 4. So we'll close them and then go ahead to 2, and then I will drop in the links for everyone into the 2 groups.
Okay, let's just bring everyone back then.
Yep, that's what's happening.
Rebecca?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Michelle. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Fine, thanks. We got assigned to a breakout room, but then we didn't see any Jamboard or anything.
Yeah, so we accidentally opened 4 instead of 2 rooms. So everyone's going to come back, and then we're going to open 2 rooms instead, and then send everyone again.
Oh, okay. So we should have gotten out when we did.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for coming back.
We were going to get kicked out. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so everyone should have gotten new prompts to go ahead into 2 different rooms. And then I will pop into the rooms and drop the links to both of the Jamboards.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, folks don't have the Jamboard link.
I just put it in room 1. I'm going to head to room 2 now.
Okay. Okay, I'm going back to room 2.
Hi, I'm sorry. I joined a little late. I do you think you could put me in one of the rooms? Thank you.
Is anyone having any issues getting into their rooms?
Of our health outcomes. So that was the example that the exercise and what we put into practice, and it really generated really great conversation. I could sense folks really digging into what that might look like. And again, this 15-minute is just a snapshot of what you would actually practice with your community, and to generate not only the conversation, but how you would want to, where and how you want to focus, and where and how you want to put your interventions in. Let's go over to the interventions, please, to show what folks talked about there. And Ophelia, do you want to? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm always staying on mute here. The group here talked a little bit about the zero tolerance in school, and specifically, I guess, Sandoval County is working on this policy. And so some of the upstreams that they talked about were partnering with teachers and tutoring and that kind of stuff. Intermediate outcomes, awareness of policies, reinforcement at home, funding for programs, and some of those health outcomes, mitigating self-harm, like some of the students were cutting themselves, and then teaching youth life skills and coping skills. So all of these different upstream issues, intermediate outcomes, and health outcomes were discussed by this group. I don't want to go through each and every one of them, but from this group, does anybody want to add anything else to this discussion?
This is Chris. I'm sorry, my whole screen just went. I'm just very curious, and I found myself wondering in our discussion. I'm wondering if anyone has ever tried kind of working out a program sort of with the students themselves, so that, for example, they might have ownership, but in the sense of like promoting a sense with the students that the school is theirs, and that they themselves promote the kind of norms they want and everything else. And they, in a sense, kind of, I hate to use this word, but I can't think of anything, police it, that watch with other kids and kind of figure out, with the administrative group, how this would all work, but that it's partly theirs. And, they set the sort of social norms and everything else, and everybody tries to contribute to that. I'm just curious. It might be along the lines of the teen courts, but maybe a little bit more.
Chris's question, was there anybody that has worked with student groups within the school districts or the school systems?
Chris Hollis, this is Sarah Bowman. There's actually an organization based out of Carlsbad called the Carlsbad Community Anti-Drug and Gang Coalition, and they created a Teens in Action group, which is a group of youth in the high school and middle school that come together and do exactly what you're talking about. So I can send you a link offline for
Right.
information about that.
Thank you.
No problem.
And Marilyn put in the,
For
sorry.
time purposes, we're going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then please feel free to use the Jamboard. This will be available to you to take with you and continue to utilize in your conversations. We're going to bring you back. I know I really wanted to have this deeper conversation with you, but because we need to pay attention to our time, and we want to hear back from you further toward the end, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we go back to where the next portion of the conversation, which is on the framework of root cause, the racism as a root cause framework approach. This framework came out or was published back in 2021, when most of us were under lockdowns and subjected to only being at work and working on focused driven work, that we didn't really able to find, we weren't able to really maybe do research and find out what can we do to shift conversations to address impacting or the way that we do and the way that we approach social determinants of health, root causes, the tools that we need. So the framework of social determinants of health and root causes are so inextricably linked with social justice, health, and racial equity. So that the root cause approach, racism as a root cause approach, is a new approach for developing strategies, policies, and mechanisms. It accounts for disproportionate advantage. There provides greater opportunity for people most impacted, because Black and Indigenous communities are most impacted negatively across the spectrum of health and societies. Are the programs or policies addressing the differential needs of the population they are meant to serve? And at the heart of this is working with communities for design and implementation as close partnerships. So it calls on us to lean on these 4 criteria or 4 principles to engage. Are we asking the questions of our organizations, of our groups, of our coalitions and advocacy groups about the precise impact, rather than by prioritizing racialized groups, rather than from a universal approach? When we think about the systems change, are we focusing on policies, systems, or environments as opposed to changing individual behaviors? And then from a long-term impact, that's sustainable and/or is it institutionalized, so that it sets the groundwork for future reparations that addresses and acknowledges the historical injustices, that to repair and shifting those resources and those power and opportunities to the groups that was impacted. So by utilizing this criteria in the work that you do, it can ensure that we are addressing these areas for long-term change, and changing a culture that embraces a health outcomes that really benefits everyone. See, I'm trying to change. So how do we know? How do we know if racism is the root cause of health disparities? Well, this framework provides a checklist, so to speak, but the caveat is that and that's listed here, that we know that if we know that there's a barrier, is there a barrier to wealth accumulation? Meaning, do some of these policies or programs, what have you, are not benefiting communities that help them to accumulate wealth in their households or in their communities? Are there inequities educationally centered? Is it displacing and the burden disproportionately in housing security, and the treatment within the justice system might not be attenuating? And then also, are we seeing that the disparities by skin tone and/or color is not being recognized? But it's important also that accounting must be made for any given race, given group's differential access to resources and those specific barriers the community is facing. So the checklist here may be a little bit more, or a little bit deeper, or a little more broader. But it is a way to know that if you're not probably addressing some of these areas that are structural, that are systemic, then maybe it's a place to go back to the criteria that guides you in the work that you do. So now I know this is a kind of it's a fast and that was a fast discussion, overview of the racism as a root cause. But we do want to get your sense of understanding about that, or how you use it, or what is it you would think that you could employ it, or do you feel like you lead with those things? And so let's go into a breakout session for like 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and just kind of synthesize that. All right, you ready, Carrie? We're going to go into 4 groups. All right.
Let us know if anyone's having a hard time getting into their room. You should have a prompt on your screen. And then Carrie, I'll just need to close the rooms at 10:30 since she only wanted them at 5.
Okay. Yeah, there wasn't a thing to change it.
Yeah. It's in the little settings at the bottom, but it's fine.
Okay.
Let's just close them at the 5 minutes. Again, is anyone having any hard times getting into their breakout rooms?
You're on mute.
Thank you all. We think we have everyone back in the room with about less than 10 minutes to spare. So we'll do a lightning round about just anyone popcorn to just feel and share what you felt you came away with. In the group I was in, we talked about how this only one person was only familiar with this framework. It's new. It sounds like there has to be a lot of more digesting about how we can use this in our work. And one person was right about to start with vocabulary, which is a critical point, and that we begin with educating ourselves. again, like we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, a lot of prerequisite work is required, not just prerequisite work about racism, but some of the root causes and things that we understand about racism and race. And so, and a lot of that is always an ongoing individual and necessary education that you do with yourself as well as with communities. So we'll go around for a moment. Anyone want to share out?
I'll share briefly. And so in our group, I think to your point, Christina, about education and our awareness with some of the isms that you referenced today, someone acknowledged their own lived experiences with sometimes not having the natural instinct to say like, oh, this is like me being racist, like right off the bat when you're doing something, or maybe you don't catch yourself. The other point of view that was brought up was being the one who experienced racism. So those two different approaches that we kind of acknowledged in our little group. And then also, I believe, and the differences in the different generations and what we consider racism. It was a little funny example from Doreen mentioned that, you know, her son, they were probably talking about different color, I think it was ducks, and Doreen noted a different colored duck, and her son said, "Mom, that's racist to say that he's different or he's a different color," and he's 13. So just kind of the different interpretations and how we think about racism and the different generations and how they interpret that. So that was our group.
Thank you, Geraldine. Michelle,
I just wanted to say that it's really important to go slowly. Again, this is a process about bringing awareness and information and education. But in my experience, and in working with the health promotion team, especially here in the metro area, with so many issues related directly to this, I think we need to be respectful above all. And I think we have to go in with no assumptions. I mean, no assumptions, because people that in your mind, you think will understand and get it immediately, sometimes that's not the case. And it can cause some misinformation, misinterpretation, miscommunication, on and on. So I think no assumptions, please. Thank you.
yes, with our longstanding historical and ahistorical stance sometimes that we don't put, this framework does require us to really ensure that we look at our history and ensure that we look at our history so that we ensure that future policies don't perpetuate and ensure a structure that benefits and privileges one over the other. And so it's important to resist that temptation to dilute or ineffectively compromise. At the same time, racism in and of itself is everyone's responsibility, but it's no one is to blame for it. But it also calls to attention that we do that internal work while we work externally with communities who are trying to communicate with us about the existing barriers and problems. And so while we build that momentum, that inertia, we also want to acknowledge our implicit or unacknowledged racism and fear will perpetuate those barriers. But if we use an approach such as this, it can help to develop or assess and evaluate those existing interventions. And it will also improve the programs and interventions so that it transforms a better environment for all. So I do want to close out with this next, trying to get to our next slide, is just some reflections we'd like to capture from you all. because it is difficult from this quote by Dr. Camara Jones for us to recognize any system of inequity that is privileging us. And so we hope that this training will help you to further and deepen the work that you do, but also call to action the more work that we may need to do internally so that we can ensure we're bridging those inequities with our communities.
And I guess this is Ophelia, and I just want to say that some of you had asked questions for links and whatnot and resources. We'll go through the chat, and if we have some things in there that we didn't list as resources, we'll get those to you.
We did in this collection of resources, you will have the list here of resources at your need.
Anybody want to share last reflections or anything like that before we close out?
Good job. This is a hard topic to broach. And so I see a lot of comments. People are saying good job. And so I'm looking forward to chatting about this topic with more with some of you all next month. But I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I also wanted to share a quick success story where we're talking. I was thinking about our local, we have a charter school here, and when I first came to town 14 years ago, the charter school had a negative, it was a negative outlook in the community, but the staff and the council applied a lot of these principles and turned that school around. And now, they have waiting lists for people that want to go in. First it was like the loser kids school and things like that. They applied a lot of these principles that we're talking about, and they brought this school up, and the kids, the students are getting education, they're getting paid, they're getting skills. It's just beautiful. It's a great success story.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you for that. That's really cool because they're applying that framework, and it's starting to show in its outcomes. I want to pass it off to Geraldine, who's going to kind of just review the next trainings upcoming.
Yes, so just to quickly end, so on March 6th, upcoming trainings related to the CHIP process. On March 6th, 2023, the topic's going to be developing your action plan, the CHIP action plan. And then on April 3rd, it will be the next training after that will be around monitoring and evaluating the CHIP action plan. And so those are the two upcoming trainings related to the CHIP process. And so the Alliance is always sending information and links for that. And it's also on our website.
Thank you, Geraldine. And with that, we appreciate you all being here. Thank you for engaging and being sincere in all your comments. And always please feel free to let Ophelia, Mallory, myself know what could we have done better. So thank you with that. Have a pleasant week and afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.